Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, most podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling stuff halfway through or even towards the end. But because if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, I need to do the slightly uncomfortable stuff up front. The show is brought to you with the help from the supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from people all the time how valuable that they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund the show to keep it going and help me reach new audiences are much appreciated. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and of course, most importantly, if you can and you have the means, please take a look at patron.sleepytimetales.net or hit the link in the show notes or from the website to go sign up and help out. If you do, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvement of thousands of people. And over and above that, there are real rewards from as little as $2 a month. So even if just helping thousands of people get a good night's sleep isn't enough, you can get early access to the weekly episode, weekly bonus episodes, and special episodes, special edits of the main show. So again, that's patron.sleepytimetales.net or patreon.com/sleepytimetales, or hit the link in the show notes. I had a recent sign up from Regan. Thank you very much, Regan, for joining the team of people who are helping me to keep the show going, and through that, those thousands of people who are getting a good night's sleep. But if signing up for a monthly support is a little bit much for you, there are other methods as well. There's also the tip jar, the merchandise store, and others. And someone who has contributed before via the tip jar and did again recently is Ben. So thanks again, Ben, for throwing a little bit in the tip jar. It's very much appreciated. And I got to highlight something I haven't mentioned in a while, that because I live in South Africa and because of exchange rates and stuff like that, even $1 is surprisingly helpful. And a few of them from a few different people is very helpful. So even if that's all you can spare on a monthly basis or once off, don't feel like it's not a worthy contribution, because literally everything is. But even if but while money is helpful to pay the bills and pay for services and keep things going, possibly an even more important thing is simply to spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, please make sure to tag me in so that I can see and I can thank you. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And I think that's enough for tonight. Last but not least, obviously, every week I have to, because it's very important to me, to shout out the music. The song is Un Désert by Kumiko. Their music can be found on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff released under various names that I recommend checking out. If you're somebody who's doing a podcast or video content or something like that, most of their stuff is public domain and free access on Creative Commons. So there's a lot of very cool stuff there. So definitely worth checking out. Thank you for that, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, with your mind spinning in emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself just not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has always struggled to sleep. Even when I was a baby, I used to give my parents sleepless nights, and that lasted for many years. Eventually, I got old enough though not to bother them about it, but sleep was always a struggle for me. It was actually only probably in my mid-30s that I discovered the tendency for voices, particularly droning male ones, to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I'd come to terms with the fact that I didn't sleep at night, so I used to go to bed with podcasts to listen to, and I used to wake up having suddenly come back to myself, realizing I'd slept through everything that I was trying to listen to. Eventually, I started listening to podcasts specifically for the purpose of helping me sleep, and that worked quite well. But then eventually, one day, a couple of years ago, I discovered that there are podcasts out there specifically intended for the purpose. I tried a few and settled on a couple that worked really well for me, but when I recommended them to other people, for various reasons, they didn't really resonate with them. It was, now, obviously, like I say, for various reasons. Sometimes they didn't like the stories, or they didn't like the narrator's voice, or something in that vein. So I thought to myself, I've got this boring, droning voice. Maybe I can try reach other people that these other podcasts couldn't. And so that was when I started up Sleepy Time Tales. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It usually runs for about 15 minutes or so. Now, a lot of people, if I get a complaint about the show, it's the thing that I get a complaint about. But it is here for a couple of important reasons. Firstly, if you're new to the show and you're not quite sure what this is for, I need to sort of make an explanation and I think, instruct you a little bit on how I think it's helpful to engage with, which I've already started doing. I've explained what the point of the show is. But also, it has a purpose for the people who've been with me for a while. It's almost a prelude to the meditation. And a lot of people complain that it takes 15 minutes to get to the story, but the story is not the point. If all goes well, you'll be asleep before you get to the story. And okay, I suddenly had noisy neighbors, so I had to pause for a minute, and now I need to try to remember where I was. If I recall correctly, I was talking about how the actual story of the show isn't really the point. It's kind of incidental, actually, to the whole idea. It's me keeping you company through an extended period. But really, this intro is super critical. If you've been listening to the show for a while, the people who've been listening to the show for a while, for them, it's sort of, it's the chance for them to prepare their minds for sleep, prepare themselves, prepare their spaces, get your lights out, have a drink of water, get yourself nicely settled, get your cushions plumped and ready, make sure you're wrapped up nice and warm and your room is warm but not too warm. And hopefully by then, you're sort of in that mindset, especially once you've been listening to the show for a while, you're in that mindset that gets you over that hump of resisting sleep. If you get to the story itself, it's a good story, and that's why I selected it. But that's also not really the point. I mean, there's a lot of half stories, semi-incompleted things that I've done in the past that are probably never going to be finished. And yeah, so if you really here for a thrilling tale to listen to, I don't think this is the podcast for you, although you're very welcome to try it and see. Now, for me, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. Firstly, for me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I actually need something to pay attention to. I've got to keep my mind focused on something and concentrate on that, so that I don't resist sleep when it comes for me. Because if I just lie in the dark, my mind stresses out into stress and spins out into stress and anxiety, and that's what keeps me awake. Some people need something a little bit more primal. This day and age, white noise or pink noise is quite a popular thing to help people sleep. But sometimes people need something a little bit else. They need the sound of rain, the sound of wind in the trees, or maybe just some boring dude droning in the background. Tonight's story it's the Opal of Karmalovic from Jewel Mysteries by Max Pemberton. The story may be a bit of a tricky one because it does take a bit of a dark turn towards the end, and I was actually hesitant to use it, but I think it's an interesting story, well told. And although I think most people don't get to the end of the stories, I mean, there was one time where I uploaded half an episode and it took 10 days for somebody to tell me. So I think it's probably not going to disturb people too much, but I also don't want to overstate it. A person shoots themselves is what happens. So spoiler alert, but also trigger warning. I don't want anybody to run into that unexpectedly. So as I said, I wasn't sure if I was going to run with the story because it's a bit of a hectic one in terms of what I normally do, but I quite liked it. But if people don't like this sort of thing, this sort of more exciting shows with tragic ends, stories with tragic ends, because also it is a complete story as well, which is a bit unusual too. Please just drop me a line at contact@sleepytimetales and let me know if you prefer I do or don't do this sort of thing. I'm interested in trying to get some feedback on it. I'm going to run with it for now, and let's see what you listeners think about it. But whatever the story is, whether it's a little story or half of something or a tragic tale of a family opal that someone is trying to learn about, what really matters with the show is you don't force sleep. If whatever you do, just keep a light mental grip on the story and allow need for sleep to come for you. Now, as I've said, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is very important you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night listening to the story, it probably won't work. I actually suggest to people, try give it at least 3 solid nights of trying. You're already an insomniac, it's not going to make things any worse, and by the 3rd night, it should be kicking in for you, or it never will. And I would give the same advice to any other sort of sleep podcast or meditation thing or ASMR thing that you do. I think it takes time to come to deal with it. You know, whether it's listening to the voice or maybe my accent is a bit strange to you, there's things to engage with, yeah, and things to get over resistance from. It's also possible, especially if it's your first night, that one episode just isn't long enough. What I do with my sleep podcasts is I have a whole bunch of them downloaded on my app that I listen on, and I queue up a bunch, and then I start with the latest one, and I let them run all night. Because what happens with me is I actually go to sleep okay lately, but I tend to wake up at like 3 a.m. and struggle to get back to sleep. And what happens in that case is I just pop my earbuds back in because they've usually fallen out, and I'll waft back to sleep again. Sometimes even when I wake up like 30 minutes or 60 minutes before my alarm goes. And this may sound strange to you, but what I do is I do the exact same thing. Pop my earbuds back in, and if I can, I get a few more minutes of sleep. And I've got to tell you, if it works out, those few minutes of sleep can be the best part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that is just deeply, deeply satisfying. But it is important that whatever happens, you just try to relax. If you're new to this show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so relax into it and give it a chance. And that's the basic idea. You relax, you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I'll tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me, because I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't rebuke yourself or beat yourself up over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself. We can try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it's not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and supposed progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to help create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. From Jewel Mysteries by Max Pemberton. Published by R.F. Fenno and Company, New York City, 1904. The Opal of Karmalovich. Dark was falling from a dull and humid sky, and the lamps were beginning to struggle for brightness in Piccadilly when the Opal of Karmalovich was first put into my hand. The day had been a sorry one for business. No light, no sun, no stay of the downpour of penetrating mist which had been swept through the city by the driving south wind from the late dawn to the mock of sunset. I had sat in my private office for 6 long hours and had not seen a customer. The umbrella-bearing throng which trod the street before my window hurried quickly through the mud and the slush, as people who had no leisure even to gaze upon precious stones they could not buy. I was going home, in fact, as the one sensible proceeding on such an afternoon, and had my hand upon the great safe to shut it, when the mirror above my desk showed me the reflection of a curious-looking man who had entered the outer shop and stood already at the counter. At the first glance, I judged that this man was no ordinary customer. His dress was altogether singular. He had a black coat covering him from his neck to his heels, a coat half smothered in astrakhan, and one which could have been made by no English tailor. But his hands were ungloved, and he wore a low hat, which might have been the hat of an office boy. I could see from the little window of my private room, which gives my eye command of the shop, that he had come on foot, and for lack of any umbrella was pitiably wet. Yet there was a fine bearing about him, and he was clearly a man given to command, for my assistant mounted to my room with his name at the first bidding. "Does he say what he wants?" I asked, reading the large card upon which the words Stanislav Karmalovich, but the man replied, "Only that he must see you immediately. I don't like the look of him at all." "Is Abel in the shop?" "He's at the door." "Very well. Let him come to the foot of my stairs, and if I ring as usual, both of you come up." In this profession of jewel selling, for every calling is a profession nowadays. We are so constantly cheek by jowl with swindlers that the coming of one more or less is of little moment in a day's work. At my own place of business, the material and personal precautions are so organized that the cleverest scoundrel living would be troubled to get free of the shop with sixpenny worth of booty on him. I have 2 armed men ready at the ring of my bell. Abel is one of them, and a private wire to the nearest police station. From an alcove well hidden on the right hand of the lower room, a man watches by day the large cases where the smaller gems are shown, and by night a couple of special guards have charge of the safe and the premises. I touch a bell twice in my room, and my own detective follows any visitor who gives birth in my mind to the slightest doubt. I ring 3 times, and any obvious impostor is held prisoner until the police come. These things are done by most jewelers in the West End. There is nothing in them either unusual or fearful. There are so many professed swindlers, so many would-be snappers up of unconsidered and considerable trifles, that precautions such as I have named are the least that common sense and common prudence will allow one to take. And they have saved me from losses that they have saved others again and again. I had scarce given my instructions to Michel, my assistant, a rare reader of intention and a fine judge of faces, when the shabby, genteel man entered. Michel placed a chair for him on the opposite side of my desk and then left the room. There was no more greeting between the newcomer and myself than a mutual nodding of heads, and he, on his part, fell at once upon his business. He took a large parcel from the inside pocket of his coat and began to unpack it. But there was so much paper, both brown and tissue, that I had some moments of leisure in which to examine him more closely before we got to talk. I set him down in my mind as a man hovering on the boundary line of the middle age, a man with infinite distinction marked in a somewhat worn face, and with some of the oldest clothes under the shielding long coat that I have ever looked upon. These I saw when he unbuttoned the enveloping cape to get at his parcel in the inner pocket, and while he undid it, I could observe that his fingers were as thin as the talons of a bird, and that he trembled all over with the mere effort of unloosening the string. The operation lasted some minutes. He spoke no word during that time, but when he had reduced the coil of brown paper to a tiny square of wash leather, I asked him, "Have you something to show me?" He looked up at me with a pair of intensely, ridiculously blue eyes and shrugged his shoulders. "Should I undo all these papers if I had not?" he responded. And I saw at once that he was a man who, from a verbal point of view, stood objectionably upon the defensive. "What sort of a stone is it?" I went on, in a somewhat uninterested tone of voice. "Not a ruby, I hope. I've just bought a parcel of rubies." By way of answer, he opened a little wash-leather bag, and taking up my jewel tongs, which lay at his hand, he held up an opal of such prodigious size and quality that I restrained myself with difficulty from crying out at the sight of it. It was a Sewanitsa stone, I saw at a glance, almost a perfect circle in shape and at least 4 inches in diameter. There was a touch of the oxide in its color which gave it the faintest suspicion of black in the shade of its lights, but for wealth of hue and dazzling richness in its general quality, it surpassed any stone I've ever known, even that in the imperial cabinet at Vienna. So brilliant was it, so fascinating in the ever-changing play of its amazing variegations, so perfect in every characteristics of the finest Hungarian gem, that for some moments I let the man hold it out to me and said no word. There was running through my mind the question which must have arisen under such circumstances. Where had he got it from? He had stolen it, I concluded at the first thought, and again at the second. How else could a man who wore rags and an astrakhan coat have come into the possession of a gem upon which the most commercial instinct would have hesitated to set a price? I had fully determined that I was face to face with a swindler, when his exclamation reminded me that he expected me to speak. "Well," he said, "are you frightened to look at it?" He had been holding out the tongs in which he had gripped the stone lightly for some seconds, and I had not yet ventured to touch them, sitting, I do not doubt, with surprise written all over my face. But when he spoke, I took the opal from him and turned my strong glass upon it. "You seem to have brought me a fine thing," I said, as carelessly as I could. "Is it a stone with a history?" "It has no history, at least none that I should care to write." "And yet," I continued, "there cannot be 3 larger opals in Europe. Do you know the stone at Vienna?" "Perfectly. But it has not the black of this, and it is coarser. This is an older stone, so far as the birth of the discovery goes, by 100 years. I thought that he was glib with his tale for a man who had such a poor one, and certainly he looked me in the face with amazing readiness. He had not the eyes of a rogue, and his manner was not that of one criminally restless. "If you will allow me," I said, when I had looked at the stone for a few moments, "I will examine this under the brighter light there. Perhaps you would like to amuse yourself with this parcel of rubies." This was a favorite little trick of mine. I had 2 or 3 parcels of stones to show to any man who came to me laboring under a sorry and palpably poor story, and one of these I then took from my desk and spread upon the table under the eyes of the Russian. The stones were all imitation and worth no more than a 6 pence each. If he were a judge, he would discover the cheats at the first sight of them. If he were a swindler, he would endeavor to steal them. In either case, the test was useful, and I took care to turn my back upon him while I examined the opal, to give him every opportunity of filling his pockets which should he choose. When I had the jewel under the powerful light of an unshaded incandescent lamp, I could see that it merited all the appreciation I had bestowed upon it at first sight. It was flawless, wanting the demerit of a single mark upon which could be pointed to in depreciation of its price. For the play of colour and raiding generosity of hues, I have already said that no man has seen its equal. I put it in the scales, called Michel to establish my own opinions, tried it by every test that can be applied to a gem so fragile and so readily harmed, and came to the only conclusion possible: that it was a stone which would make a sensation in any market, and call bids in from all the courts in Europe. It remained for me to learn the history of it, and with that I went back to my desk and resumed the conversation, first glancing at the sham parcel of rubies to find that the man had not even looked at them. "It is a remarkable opal," I said, "the finest ever put before me. You have come to sell it, I presume?" "Exactly. I want £5,000 for it." "And if I make you a bid, are you prepared to furnish me with a history, both of it and of yourself?" He shrugged his shoulders contemptuously. "If you think that I've stolen it, we had better close the discussion at once. I am not prepared to tell my history to every tradesman I deal with." "In that case," said I, "you have wasted your time. I buy no jewels that I do not know all about." His superciliousness was almost impertinent. It would have been quite so if it had not been dominated by an absurd and almost grotesque pride, which accounted for his temper. I was sure then that he was either an honest man or the best actor I had ever seen. "Think the matter over," I added in a less indifferent tone. "I am certain that you will acquit me of unreasonableness. Call here again in a day or 2 and we will have a chat about it." This softer speech availed me as little as the other. He made no sort of answer to it, but packing his opal carefully again, he rose abruptly and left the shop. As he went, I touched my bell twice, and Abel followed him quietly down Piccadilly, while I sent a line to Scotland Yard informing the commissioners of the presence of such a man as the Russian in London, and of the gargantuan jewel which he carried. Then I went home through the fog and the humid night. But my way was lighted by a memory of the magnificent gem I had seen, and the hunger for the opal was already upon me. The inquiry at Scotland Yard proved quite futile. The police telegraphed to Paris, to Berlin, to St. Petersburg, to New York, but got no tidings of a robbery or of the man whom mere circumstances pointed at as a pretender. This seemed to be the most amazing, since I could not conceive that a stone such as this would not have made a sensation in some places. Jewels above all material things do not hide their light under bushels. Let there be a great find at Kimberley or in the Burmese mines. Let a fine emerald or a perfect turquoise be brought to Europe, and every dealer in the country knows its weight, its colour, and its value before 3 days have passed. If this man who hugged this small fortune to him, and without it was a beggar, had been a worker at Srebrenica, he would have told me the fact plainly. But he spoke of the opal being older even than the famous and commonly cited specimen at Vienna. How came it that he alone had the history of such an ancient gem? There was only one answer to such a question, and the history of his possession of it, at any rate, would not bear inquiry. Such perplexity was not removed by Abel's account of his journey after Karmalovic. He had followed the man from Piccadilly to Oxford Circus. Thence, after a long wait in Regent's Park, where the Russian sat for at least an hour on a seat near the Botanical Gardens entrance, to a small house in Boscobel Place. This was evidently a lodging house, offering that fare of shabbiness and dirt which must perforce be attractive to the needy. There was a light burning at the window of the pretentiously poor drawing room when the man arrived, and a girl, apparently not more than 25 years of age, came down into the hall to greet him. The pair afterwards showing at the window for a moment before the blinds were drawn. An inquiry by my man for apartments in the house elicited only a shrill cackle and a negative from a shuffling hag who answered the knock. A tour of the little shops in the neighbourhood provided the further clue that they paid for nothing. This suburban estimation of personal worth was a confirmation of my conclusion drawn from the rags beneath the astrakhan coat. The Russian was a poor man. Except for the possession of the jewel, he was near to being a beggar. And yet he had not sought to borrow money off of me, and he had put the price of £5,000 upon his property. All these things did not leave my mind for the next week. I was in daily communication with Scotland Yard, but to absolutely no purpose. Their sharpest men handled the case and confessed that they could make nothing of it. We had the house in Boscobel Place watched, but so far as we could learn, Karmalovic, as he called himself, never left it. Meanwhile, I began to think that I had betrayed exceedingly poor judgment in raising the question at all. As the days went by, I suffered that stone hunger which a student of opals alone can know. I began to believe that I had lost by my folly one of the greatest possessions that could come to a man in my business. I knew that it would be an act of childishness to go to the house and reopen the negotiations, for I could not bid for that which the first telegram from the continent might prove to be feloniously gotten, and the embarkation of such a sum as asked was not a matter for the spur of the moment, but for the closest deliberation, to say nothing of financial preparation. Yet I would have given £50 if the owner of it had walked into my office again, and I had never heard a footstep in the outer shop during the week following his visit, but I looked up in the hope of seeing him. A fortnight passed, and I thought that I had got to the beginning and end of the opal mystery, when one morning, the moment after I had entered my office, Michelle told me that a lady wished to see me. I had scarce time to tell him that I could see no one for an hour, when the visitor pushed past him into the den, and sat herself down in the chair before my writing desk. As in all business, we appreciate and listen to impertinence in the jewel trade. And when I observed the magnificent impudence of the young milady, I asked Michelle to leave us and waited for her to speak. She was a delicate-looking woman, an Italian, I thought, from the dark hue of her skin and the lustrous beauty of her eyes, but she was exceedingly shabbily dressed and her hands were ungloved. She was not a woman you would have marked in the stalls of a theatre as the fit subject for an advertising photographer, but there was a great sweetness in her face, and those signs of bodily weakness and want of strength which so often enhance a woman's beauty. When she spoke, although she had little English, her voice was well modulated and remarkably pleasing. "You are Monsieur Bernard Sutton?" she asked, putting one hand upon my table and the other between the buttons of her bodice. I bowed in answer to her. "You have met my husband. I am Madame Karmalovich. He was here, it is 15 days, to sell you an opal. I have brought it again to you now, for I am sure you wish to buy it." "You will pardon me," I said, "but I am waiting for the history of the jewel which your husband promised me. I rather expected that he would have sent it." Oh, I know so well, and I have asked him many times," she answered. "But you can believe me, he will tell of his past to no one, not even to me. But he is honest and true, and there is not such a man in all your city. And he has suffered. You may buy this beautiful thing now, and you will never regret it. I tell you so from all my heart." "But surely, madam," said I, "you must see that I cannot pay such a price as your husband is asking for his property if he will not tell me who he is and where he comes from." "Yes, that is it. Not even to me has he spoken of these things. I was married to him 6 years ago now at Naples, and he has always had the opal which he offers to you. We were rich then, but we have known suffering, and this alone is left to us. You will buy it of my husband, for you in all this London are the man to buy it, and I will give you fame and money. It must give you both, for we ask but £4,000 for it." I started at this. Here was a drop of £1,000 upon the price asked but 15 days ago. What did it mean? I took up the gem, which the woman had placed upon the table, and I saw in a moment. The stone was dimming. It had lost colour since I had seen it. It had lost, too, I judged, at least 1/3 of its value. I had heard the old woman's tales of the capricious changefulness of this remarkable gem, but it was the first time that I had ever witnessed for myself such an unmistakable depreciation. The woman read the surprise in my eyes and answered my thoughts herself, thoughtful, and her dark eyes touched with tears. "You see what I see," she said. "The jewel that you have in your hand is the index to my husband's life. He has told me so often. When he is well, it is well. When hope has come to him, the lights which shine there are as the light of his hope. When he is ill, the opal fades. When he dies, it will die too. That is what I believe and what he believes. And it is what his father told him when he gave him the treasure, nearly all that was left of a great fortune." This tale astounded me. It betrayed absurd superstition, but was the first ray of coherent explanation which had thrown upon the case. I took up the thread with avidity and pursued it. "Your husband's father was a rich man?" I asked. "Is he dead?" She looked up with a start, then dropped her eyes quickly and mumbled something. Her hesitation was so marked that I put her whole story from me as a clever fabrication, and returned again to the theory of robbery. "Madame," I said, "unless your husband can add to that to which you tell me, I shall be unable to purchase your jewel." "Oh, for the love of God, don't say that," she cried. "We are so poor, we have hardly eaten for days. Come and see Monsieur Karmalovich, and he will tell you all. I implore you, and you will never regret this kindness. My husband is a good friend, he will reward your friendship. You will not refuse me this." It is hard to deny a pretty woman, and harder still when she pleads with tears in her voice. I told her that I would go and see her husband on the following evening at 9 o'clock, and counseled her to persuade him in the time between to be frank with me, since frankness alone could avail him. She accepted my advice with gratitude and left as she had come, her pretty face made handsomer by its look of gloom and pensiveness. Then I fell to thinking upon the wisdom or want of wisdom in the promise I had given. Stories of men drugged or robbed or murdered by jewel thieves crowded upon my mind, but always with the recollection that I should carry nothing to Boscobel Place. A man who had no more upon him than a well-worn suit of clothes and a Swiss leather watch in a silver case, such as I carry invariably, would scarce be quarry for the most venturesome shop-hawk that the history of knavery has made known to us. I could risk nothing by going to the house, I was sure. But I might get the opal, and for that I longed still with a fever for possession which could only be accounted for by the beauty of the gem. Being come to this determination, I left my own house in a hansom cab on the following evening at 8:30, taking Abel with me, more after my usual custom than from any prophetic alarm. I had money upon me sufficient only for the payment of the cab, and I took the extreme precaution of putting aside the diamond ring that I had been wearing during the day. As I live in Bayswater, it was but a short drive across Paddington Green and down the Marylebone Road to Boscobel Place, and when we reached the house, we found it lighted up on the drawing-room floor, as Abel had seen it his first going there. But the hall was quite in darkness, and I had to ring twice before the shrill-voiced dame I had heard of answered to my knock. She carried a frowsy candle in her hand, and I was so uncanny-looking that I motioned to Abel to keep a watch from the outside upon the house before I went upstairs to that which was a typical lodging-house room. There was a tapestry sofa against one wall, half a dozen chairs in evident decline stood in hilarious attitudes, some seaweed, protected for no obvious reason by the shades of glass, decorated the mantelpiece, and a sampler displayed the obviously aggravating advice to a tenant of such a place: waste not, want not. But the rickety writing table was strewn with papers, and there was half a cigar lying upon the edge of it, and a cup of coffee had grown cold in the dish. The aspect of the place amazed me. I began to regret that I had set out upon any such enterprise, but I had no time to draw back before the Russian entered. He wore an out-at-elbow velvet cloak, and the rest of his dress was shabby enough to suit his surroundings. I noticed, however, that he offered me a seat with a gesture that was superb, and that his manner was less agitated than it had been at our first meeting. "I am glad to see you," he said. "You have come to buy my opal?" "Under certain conditions, yes." "That is very good of you, but I'm offering you a great bargain. My price for the stone is now £3,000, 1,000 less than my wife offered it yesterday." "It has lost more of its colour then?" "Decidedly, or I should not have lowered my claim, but see for yourself." He took the stone from the wash-leather bag and laid it upon the writing table. I stared with amazement and sorrow at the sight of it. The glorious lights I admired not 20 days ago were half gone. A dull, salty red tinge was creeping over the superb green, and the scintillating black which had made me covet the jewel with such longing. Yet it remained, even in its comparative poverty, the most remarkable gem I had ever put my hand upon. "The stone is certainly going off," I said in answer to him. "What guarantee have I that it will not be worthless in a month's time?" "You have my word. It is a tradition of our family that he who owns that heirloom when it begins to fade must sell it or die, and sell it at its worth. If I continue to possess it, the tradition must prove itself, or I shall die of sheer starvation." "And if another has it?" "It will regain its lights. I have no doubt of it, for it has gone like this before when a death has happened amongst us. If you are content to take my word, I will return to you in 6 months' time and make good any loss you have suffered by it. But I should want some money now, tonight, before an hour. Could you let me have it? If I bought your stone, you could have the money for it. My man who is outside would fetch my checkbook. At the word man, he went to the window and saw Abel standing beneath the street lamp. He looked fixedly at the fellow for a moment, then drew down the blinds in a deliberate way which I did not like at all. That servant of yours has been set to watch this house for 10 days, he said. Was that by your order? I was so completely taken aback by his discovery that I sat for a moment dumbfounded, and I gave him no answer. He, however, seemed trembling with passion. Was it by your orders? He asked again, standing over me and almost hissing out his words. It was, I answered after a pause, but you see, circumstances were suspicious. Suspicious? Then you did believe me to be a rogue. I have shot men for less. I attempted to explain, but he would not hear me. He had lost command of himself, stalking up and down the room with great strides until the temper tautened his veins, and his lean hands seemed nothing but wire and bones. At last he took a revolver from the drawer in his table and deliberately put cartridges into it. I stood up at the sight of it and made a step towards the window, but he pointed the pistol straight at me, crying, "Sit down if you wish to live another minute, and say, do you still believe me to be a swindler?" The situation was so dangerous, for the man was obviously but half sane, and I do not know what I said in answer to him. Yet he pursued my words fiercely, scarce hearing my reply before he continued. You have had my house watched, and as I know now, you have branded my name before the police as that of a criminal. You shall make atonement here on the spot by buying that opal, or you do not leave the room alive. It was a desperate trial, and I sat for some minutes as a man on the borderland of death. Had I been sensible then and fenced with him in his words, I should now possess the opal. But I let out the whole of my thoughts, and the jewel went with them. I cannot buy your stone, I said, until I have your history and your father's. But I said no more, for at the mention of his father he cried out like a wounded beast, and fired the revolver straight at my head. The shot skinned my forehead, and the powder behind it blackened my face, but I had no other injury, and I sprang upon him. For some moments the struggle was appalling. I had him gripped about the waist with my left arm, my right clutching the hand wherein he held the pistol. He in turn put his left hand upon my throat and threw his right leg around mine with a sinewy strength that amazed me. Thus we were, rocking like two trees blown in a gale, now swaying towards the window, now to the door, now crashing against the table or hurling the papers and the ink and the ornaments in a confused heap, as fighting the ground foot by foot we battled for the mastery. But I could not cry out, for his grip about my neck was the grip of a maniac, and as it tightened and tightened, the light grew dim before my eyes. I felt that I was choking. This he knew, and with overpowering fury pressed his fingers upon my throat until he cut me with his nails as with knives. Then at last I reeled from the agony of it, and we fell with tremendous force under the window, he uppermost. Of that lifelong minute that followed I remember but little. I know only that he knelt upon my chest, still gripping my throat with his left hand, and he began to reach out for his revolver, which had dropped beneath the table in our struggle. I had just seen him reach it with his fingertips, and so draw it inch by inch towards him, when a fearful scream rang out in the room and his hand was stayed. The scream was from the woman who had come to Piccadilly the day before, and it was followed by a terrible paroxysm of weeping, then by a heavy fall as the terrified girl fainted. He let me go at this and stood straight up, but at the first step towards his wife, he put his foot upon the great opal, which we had thrown to the ground in our encounter, and he crushed it into 1,000 fragments. When he saw what he had done, one cry and one alone escaped from him. But before I could raise my hand to stay him, he had turned the pistol to his head and blown his brains out. The story of the opal of Kamalovich is almost told. A long inquiry after the man's death added to these facts that few I had already gleaned. He was the son of a banker in Budapest, a noble Russian who had emigrated to Hungary and taken his wealth with him to embark in his business. He himself had been educated partly in England, partly in France, but at the moment when he should have entered the great firm in Budapest, there came the Argentine crash, and his father was one of those who succumbed. But he did more than succumb. He helped himself to the money of his partners and, being discovered, was sentenced as a common felon and is at this moment in a Hungarian prison. Stanislav, the son, was left to clear up the estate, and got from it, when all was settled, a few £1,000s, by the generosity of the father's partners. Beyond these, he had the opal which the family had possessed for 300 years, buying it originally in Vienna. This possession, however, had been, for the sake of some absurd tradition, always kept a profound secret. And when the great crash came, the man whose death I had witnessed took it as his fortune. For some years he had lived freely at Rome, at Nice, at Naples, where he married. But his money being almost spent, he brought his wife to England, and there attempted to sell the jewel. As he would tell nothing of his history, lest his father's name should suffer, he found no buyer, and dragged on from month to month, going deeper in the byways of poverty until he came to me. The rest I have told you. Of the opal, which I saw so woefully crushed in the lodging house in Boscobel Place, but one large fragment remained. I've had that set in a ring, and I've sold it today for £50. The money will go to Madame Kamalovich, who has returned to her parents in Naples. She has suffered much. And that's the story for tonight. If you enjoyed it and you would like to read it yourself, or maybe some other short stories in a similar vein, you can find the book on Project Gutenberg at the link that I will put in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Desert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.